Ladies and gentlemen, to season 3, episode 2 of the NetScaler podcast with your host here, Chris Dorn. Joining me today is Justin Weldon and John Clayman. So welcome, guys. Thanks for being back again.
Good morning. Day.
Yeah, you guys having a good week so far? Ready for the weekend?
I am more than ready for the weekend.
More than ready
Absolutely.
for the weekend. Awesome. Yeah, I heard you got some cool outdoor activities you got lined up there, John. So a little envious.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to my 2 days off next week and a little time outdoors camping and spending some time with my buddies.
Yeah, very nice. Always good to recharge. Get out there, get some fresh air in you.
For sure.
So yeah, we'll get this kind of going, and then you'll be on your way next week. And when you come back, we'll like to hear about it. But while we're here today, we want to chat about some of the components of the NetScaler that we, sometimes overlook, and maybe give some updates to our listeners here. And we put a couple of articles here that we were referencing a little bit that aren't brand new. I mean, it's CTX article 122942, and it's got just kind of points out some of the features that people may overlook and not necessarily realize that they have access to. Some of the features and modes and components of the NetScaler stack that can take your investment to the next level. A lot of folks traditionally, they get into the NetScaler area and they're using it for the gateway components, and then they're load balancing and some of the Citrix legacy technologies that might have been inside of their environment and their CVAD stack. And then typically, me personally, I would find that they would, jump over and start leveraging NetScaler for some of the more core infrastructure components, like maybe make a VIP and point their DNS to like a alias almost for their DNS access or their LDAP access, and features like that they would grow into. But it seems, some of these things are overlooked a lot of times, and it's like you really want to let customers know that they got a lot of different feature sets in here that they can really extend the value and the investment that they have inside of NetScaler. So I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of point that out, and maybe it's new to some folks, maybe it's just a reminder for others. But those are some of the topics I'd like for us to chat about a little bit today. And then maybe we can look at a little bit, like you were stating before we started the recording here, there's a little bit of consolidation on the hardware platforms. I think that'd be a good update for everybody as well, to kind of hear about that a little bit. So
Sure.
Yeah, cool. Well, again, thanks for being here. I'll get this blog article kind of up and looking at it. And we're looking at, again, that CTX article. It's not brand new by any means. When was it published? Back in 2020. So a little bit of review for myself as well. But yeah, again, a lot of customers that kind of get into the NetScaler side, and they might have other load balancers in their environment, and it's like we can move some of these workloads over to the NetScaler, and kind of consolidate your footprint of your access layer technologies that we can secure and provide high availability for all these components. And some of them, they kind of jump out at me. Some of them I've seen quite a bit over the years of stuff like the SSL offloading, the GSLB components. And then inside of projects, I would maybe do a project, help them get stood up and come back around a year later. Might see stuff like a little more investment and time dedicated into the content switching, for example. I want to see what you guys maybe have seen over your careers with NetScaler, some of the features and modes and components that customers might be taking advantage of outside of just the traditional kind of gateway presentation there.
Yeah.
So
for me, it's I always see the features not being used the most is app firewall. Customers are they're licensed for it with Platinum or Premium, whatever name it is now, and yeah, I'm just not using it. And it's a scary feature to some because there are a lot of knobs you can turn and switches you can do that. You can also just apply base signatures that get auto updated, and that goes a long way towards protecting you against any the known bad stuff that's out there, right?
Oh yeah, And
and it's
those
just never
signatures,
implemented.
they were provided by WebRoot, were they not?
Citrix updates them from AWS. There's URL in AWS.
Yeah,
Is it?
but the signatures themselves are based on WebRoot signatures, I believe so.
Yes, WebRoot. Yes.
So, that brings a point is customers not wanting to deploy it when they have it. You get customers who are buying a NetScaler, artist formerly known as ADC, formerly known as NetScaler. So we've come full circle with the licensing scheme here, or the naming scheme convention. But they're afraid to deploy new technologies on their NetScalers because they don't understand the NetScaler. They bought it for gateway into their Citrix environment. They could utilize the WAF to help protect. And when I talk about WAF, it's web app firewall, or the app firewall, as you were talking about, Justin. They can use it to help protect their storefront environment, the authentication process for their gateway. If they have any web apps on their inside their environment. And then again, you're starting to talk about things that maybe the ownership or owners of those NetScalers are uncomfortable with, because it's beyond their scope of responsibility or management. So that brings in, okay, how do we sell this internally? And I think that's again moving outside of somebody's comfort zone, to be able to say, okay, bring this to the security team, or bring this to your web team, or whoever. Because we already own it, let's maximize our investment. Let's bring this into our environment beyond simply as a gateway or AAA vAuth into our Citrix environment. So that's at least from my visibility of it. And then when we couple that with application delivery management, or ADM, you get the visibility of what is actually going on once you implement WAF. So you can implement WAF from a perspective of protecting, or simply reporting and visualizing what is going on in your environment without blocking anything. And then once you do the visualization and you review what's going on, you start locking your environment down to help protect your infrastructure.
Yeah, good points. I think I've seen pretty much the same kind of pattern over the years. I think a little bit of that, I think about half of that's played into, like we stated here, just not understanding it and potentially being a little put off from having to learn something new, or maybe it's a web app that has, zero capability of downtime, and it's like I don't want to touch that at all. But I think that, the customers, they would really need to kind of evaluate and look at, there needs to be a little bit of investment and a testing setup that you need to go through with the web application components, because the risk factor that's presented there, and if that application is important of an application as you're leading us to believe, that you really need to put some effort into protecting it. So then that would play into the conversation. Well, what's it actually protecting? And we would talk about the cross-site scripting and SQL injection stuff over and over again. And then, a couple years ago, we got to that conversation with the bot mitigation piece. So that was like a little bit new thing that kind of played in between the NetScaler and the application delivery manager there. So you could have some insights to actually see what was going on there. But then the other half of that, I kind of see that customers are hosting less and less of their own web apps anymore. It's like they don't necessarily have a farm or a big pool of Windows IIS servers, that they're proxying through the VIP, and then they need to protect it with the web application. It's like, well, we took our homegrown application and we moved it over to one of the big names of that SaaS option. So I think that played into it a little bit as well. But then that third piece of that, I think, is folks are starting to have to offer their API integrations. So then that comes back to having to protect it with pretty much the same setup and technology stack here as you had with protecting those old websites that you were presenting to the public. Have you guys seen it kind of follow that kind of trend?
Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely going into the microservices, and being able to provide that same level of protection there is.
Yeah, and that DOS protection and protecting the application itself. And then it's kind of like the naming convention almost seems like it's come back around full circle there. It's like you might not necessarily have those IIS web services presenting those old static pages, or even if you're accepting credit card payments was a big one why people would put that in place. But again, that's a lot of those kind of workloads have shifted off into other locations with the SaaS options. But the APIs and the stuff that they're still developing, customers are developing themselves in-house, they can fully take advantage of those kind of features on the NetScaler. Get that insight and protection that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to John's point earlier about having, they got the hardware, but maybe it's a different OU or different group in the organization, right, that has access to it, and they don't want to delegate control. I see a lot of times that, customers don't even have the group, the AD group membership stuff set up on these boxes. So, you can delegate, if you've got a web application team and then another team that's responsible for Citrix, and the Citrix team owns it, you can very easily delegate pieces of the configuration or abilities to other groups so that you can expand, the NetScaler footprint in terms of services and getting other groups able to use it, and also getting them on board to use it. Yeah, because lots of times it's just NS root or another. They've changed the password. Thankfully, it's not NS root. I don't see that. But, yeah, just getting more AD groups available to use it, and then having those OUs leverage the NetScaler for their services. I think that could go a long way too.
Oh yeah, I think, and that kind of leads into one of the components that we'd look at on the micro assessments we do for customers. It's like I point out, you got the administrative partitions there, and I can't say I've really ever seen, but maybe one customer that jumps out at me that they had that actually in place and as a practice inside of their organization. And it's like everybody else, the other 99%, it's still any request or change or anything would come back to the NetScaler person inside of the organization. And it's like, you save yourself some ticket and configuration time by just sharing the responsibility on the NetScaler, and very easy to do. It doesn't require you to deploy another NetScaler. You're just carving out a little bit of responsibility on the ADC or the NetScaler itself for the customer to be able to take advantage of. And, that should go back over to the application owner so they have some kind of control over it versus really kind of putting a wall up between the NetScaler person and that application owner. That was a very good example. Of course, like the GSLB is still a big component. I'm still actively discussing that with customers. The content switching piece, that was always kind of a cool one because it was, it could save a ton of IP addresses and reduce a lot of complexity just by simply adding one of the responder policies or rewrites there to help take advantage of sending users behind that front end bit back to the resources that they needed to work with. And always thought that was a pretty cool setup where there was tons of value in it. And I'd see folks that were like, yeah, the content switching piece.
I mean, it used to be that was like standard if you had like SharePoint or Exchange on-prem, right? So with that moving to the cloud, unless you're really heavily into web applications, I haven't seen the content switching used as much. That was like a primary use case for it, at least what I encountered was Exchange.
I'd see it a lot with the web hosting companies. So yeah, that was, they're just whipping up retail pages or sometimes like the realtors would have like a lot of listings for the different options that they would have available. And some of that is shifted over to some more of the the SaaS kind of providers for it. But, when there are web hosting companies that are still, delivering that information to users and can really take advantage of stuff like that content switching piece. Have you guys, and that kind of plays into, since we tackled the features of the content switching and the web application firewall, how many times have you seen folks really want to inject and front end their gateway access with web application firewall and content switching? How often has that come up over the years?
That is something that is not widely used from what my experiences are, especially since you can only have one content switch in front of a gateway itself. That limits the use case itself. But going back to content switching or redirects and rewrites and responder policies, those come into play quite often with M&A. If you have an organization that is consuming another organization and you got a customer that goes to a certain URL, that URL can then be redirected to the correct URL, or maybe if you're redeploying or refreshing your web infrastructure, you can use those policies to move over to the new farm, if you will, or a SaaS entity, if you will, for authentication and consumption that way. So that's another use case for it.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of just browsing down the line here, one that pops out, a lot of them are pretty much checked off and during the standard deployments, like the SSL offloading and integrated caching and any more of the AAA services. But a couple of them are popping out at me, like OSPF and RIP and BGP. I've never personally dealt with that in a customer situation. Have you guys ever seen folks take advantage of those features?
Typically we'll run into BGP if you're doing link load balancing on the NetScaler, or you're using BGP between data centers for high availability or IP retention, that type of stuff. That's pretty much about it, at least from what I've seen.
Yeah, and I've seen even less than that. So, I mean, it's good. And then, of course, it can do it. We kind of always position the NetScaler as that Swiss Army knife. I know that's been used over and over again over the years, but that basically comes back to, can I do that with the NetScaler? And quite honestly, the answer has always been yes, even if it took some investigation to kind of put the solution together with the different features and modes that we need some kind of combination of to make the solution a success. It's been a pretty cool product that I've never been able to say no. That the NetScaler is not going to be able to do that for you, because between these combinations, there's definitely a way to achieve and be successful with what it is you're trying to solve here.
Sure.
Now, one thing I will say about kind of the flip side about what feature we're talking about, features and modes that aren't used as much as we like to see. The flip side to that are some of the ones that are used or enabled but should not be, or maybe that's an opinion. But the MAC-based forwarding piece that gets left on in environments, or the magic-based forwarding, because it works, right? It's great, but it's not great if you're trying to troubleshoot anything, right? Because routing tables go out the door. But yeah, that's something I always see turned on in environments, and it just makes everything work, which is awesome. But again, if you got to troubleshoot it, it can give you more problems.
Yeah,
so that's one that turn off. But if you turn that off, you got to make sure your routing tables and everything is squared away properly, because
yeah, I've seen it as one of those, it was flipped on in a troubleshooting session. Like they didn't really understand why something wasn't working. And for our listeners, the Mac-based forwarding basically is you check it off on the NetScaler, and it tells the NetScaler to respond to a request out the same interface that it was received on. So that, like Justin's pointing out there, that kind of shouldn't be needed if your routing and your subnet IPs and everything were defined properly, and you know where the traffic's going, and maybe you're putting some policy-based routes on top of that to try to circumvent any issues with traffic going in the direction that you need it to go. But to your point, yeah, Justin, it's like, why is this turned on? And then they simply uncheck it, you know, and then everything goes offline, and it's like, oh, that's why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
And now we know what we're dealing with here. Yeah, very neat. But yeah, again, you know, there's tons of options here. Customers, you know, give us a call. We can talk about some of those components and issues that you might be having, or those what you're presented with as far as efforts that you need to start putting into your application or the services that you're delivering, and how the NetScaler will be able to help you achieve that. Not only deliver it, but secure it and provide insights into where that traffic's going and how it's being utilized and who's trying to be malicious with it as well. I think that's always a pretty important part there. So based on that, you know, I don't think we've got a lot of new features on deck coming down the pipeline by any means. These have all kind of been in place for a long time. Pretty much cover, I would have just about everything as far as what you would need access to inside of your toolbox to deliver those solutions to your users. But let's come back and maybe change the direction of the conversation a little bit, because before we start recording, John brought up some good points that we're going to see some a little bit of standardization on some of the form factors on the NetScalers themselves, where some of the pieces are removed, and there's a little bit of cleanup work going on the back end here with NetScaler, which that might be a little rough for some folks right now as far as trying to get some insight and understanding into what they have access to and options in as far as their licensing and their boxes. But I think at the end of the day, once this is all kind of hammered out from the NetScaler teams, this is going to make things a lot easier for everybody to understand, and make it a little more clear and defined for everybody. So, John, if you wouldn't mind, maybe you could chat about those form factors a little bit for us first here.
Sure. Well, Citrix or NetScaler, if you will, is actually still retaining the 5 platforms that we have. And what I mean by platforms is the VPX, which is our virtual appliance. You have the MPX, which is typically a single instance appliance for hardware. We have our SDX, which is a multi-tenant appliance. And you know, typically that was brought out for ISPs and things like that, but large organizations found it useful for deploying multiple VPXs or multiple NetScalers for use or consumption inside the organization itself. Doesn't have to be large enterprise organizations. It could be an organization that, you know, wants to have a separate instance for WAF bot mitigation. They have a separate instance for gateway. They have a separate instance for internal or external DMZ communications. So when you have a need, in fact, I had a customer in last year who had some 5900 appliances, which is one of our older MPX platforms, if you will, and they had deployed some new SDX 9100s to segregate their traffic to help better for mitigation as management, as well as workload capabilities, if you will, because what that enables you to do, as we were talking about previously, sharing the configuration or sharing the workload as far as the management of the NetScalers. You can also, at that point in time, I've got a WAF that I want to deploy. You can your security department would probably be the one who takes ownership or majority ownership stake in that particular appliance. So you can hand them a virtual appliance running on this infrastructure for them to control as they need to without affecting the rest of your gateway, your internal external load balancing, or whatever additional use cases you have on that particular appliance. And then of course we have our CPX, which is our container-based product for Docker, Kubernetes, that type of stuff. And then our BLX appliance. Our BLX is what's considered a bare metal appliance, but it's really a installed on a Linux kernel, if you will, that enables you to have, I think it's up to 40 gig throughput on that particular appliance itself. So in all 5 environments, all 5 appliances themselves use the same form factor or the same base code for that NetScaler and the engineering releases. So that gives you the same look and feel across the platforms there, if you will, and it doesn't give you a different learning curve. But one of the things where we're consolidating is as we move forward, and for those customers who are not aware, Citrix or Cloud Software Group went through a consolidation of entities, and we broke out into business units. And Citrix is its own entity, and NetScaler is its own entity, the same as XenTegra and all that. They're business units within inside our the umbrella organization, if you will. But where that comes into play is as business moves forward, we're doing some consolidation amongst our infrastructure, and with that, as with anything, you look at new model cars or new model cell phones or whatever, you have several platforms or several different models in the marketplace, if you will, at any point in time. But what we're doing differently here is with, let's just talk about the 15K appliance and the 8900 appliance that we used to have, the MPX. Let's just say you bought an MPX 8900. At one point in time, you can convert that 8900 into an SDX or multi-tenant appliance. The same thing with the 15K. With the new appliances that we released last year, the 9100 appliance MPX or SDX, or MPX, let's just talk about since we're talking about conversions, or the MPX 16K, you can no longer upgrade those appliances. So if you want to, and what I mean by upgrading, you cannot convert those appliances from an MPX platform to an SDX platform. That is no longer the case. There was a minuscule amount of customers doing that. So with the amount of upkeep and cost to engineering, they decided to, okay, we're only going to release an MPX. We're only going to release an SDX. We're not going to enable you to bounce between an MPX and an SDX. So that's one of the changes that came out, as well as the different licensing types that we brought. And what I mean by that is that we consolidated, we used to have 3 levels of licensing, standard, advanced, and premium. We have now consolidated down to advanced and premium. So you no longer have a standard edition license to consume. We also consolidated, we removed perpetual licensing. So what that enables our customers to do is consume, it's really currently 3 different, if we're talking about a VPX, you have 3 different licensing strategies, but all 3 are going to be subscription based. One is vCPU, which you allocate a number of vCPU instances to that particular appliance, and that is not throttled as far as the throughput is concerned, like a pooled licensing structure is, where you allocate the bandwidth to the appliance, and you can allocate, let's just say with pooled licensing, you want to start out with a 200 meg appliance, but you want to say, okay, I know later down the road that I might need to go to do a 1 gig appliance or larger. So what you can do with the pooled licensing structure that you cannot do with vCPU, because as soon as you allocate the vCPU to that particular appliance, it will pull it from your pool of vCPU licenses. With pooled licensing, you can actually backload that particular appliance with the amount of hardware you think you may need down the road. And what that enables you is to be, if you have the capacity in your pool, allocate the additional bandwidth down the road without actually rebooting that appliance. So that's what pooled licensing structure is. It enables you to float licensing amongst your appliances. If you were to convert or to buy a pooled licensing structure for an MPX or SDX, that with a perpetual licensing structure, that bandwidth was actually allocated to that particular hardware. And that is no longer the case. With a pooled licensing structure, that bandwidth in instances is actually owned by what we call application delivery management, which is the management console for the NetScalers. And then you point that appliance to ADM to pull the licensing that you want for that appliance. That gives you the opportunity to float that licensing or that bandwidth, if you will, between appliances, either to be consumed as a physical appliance or a virtual appliance. So if you wanted to deploy a VPX out of the same pool that you have for the SDX or the MPX, you can do so. So there's a lot of flexibility with the pooled licensing. And then, of course, we have our termed licensing, which is really takes the place of yesterday's perpetual licensing, because the perpetual licensing I don't really see as perpetual, meaning I own this license. Really what the perpetual license was, it was a hard-coded throughput for that particular appliance, which is what our termed appliance is. If I wanted to purchase yesterday's VPX 1000, I could still buy a hard-coded VPX today, but it's going to be a VPX termed appliance. And that's really some of the differences that have come out over the last 3 to 6 months with the organization changes for CSG. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it does. So I mean, we were pretty familiar, and customers liked it too when they had the pool licensing and the flexibility to move some stuff around. As a lot of customers they know and are dealing with their if they were to move to a 9100 series, and it's a zero capacity appliance, and they look at like a starter pool, for example. Um, a starter pool might have, I think it's got 4 or 5 instances that are associated with the pool, and then bandwidth or CPU, of course, that we bind to those instances as they're deployed. Or is that kind of pool with those starter packs? Is that really kind of directed towards that particular model of NetScaler physical appliance, or do they have the capability? And I know situations where they do have the capability, like if they add on a couple extra standalone instances, but are the starter packs kind of directed more towards just that appliance, that physical appliance that they're looking to stand up and get going?
Yeah, and that would be the case with the 9100 and the 16K. We still currently have the MPX 5900 series appliance, which you can purchase as pooled right now as well until it goes end of sale. But where this evolves is you have a starter pool that has the instances. In an MPX standpoint, there is no instance because the appliance is the instance itself. But you have the minimum bandwidth that would be associated to start that appliance. So like a 5900, that would be a starter pool of 1 gig. You could allocate it. You can purchase add-on instances if you wanted to deploy VPXs and add on gigs of bandwidth to that starter pool. All right. If you wanted to make that a 5 gig appliance, you could do that by adding additional bandwidth, or a 2 gig appliance or a 3 gig appliance. All right. And that's going to be the same thing with the SDX in the 9100 or the 16K MPX or SDX itself. But the starter pools also play in the VPX strategy, because you can buy a 5 instance, 5 gig of bandwidth starter pool and add on to get to, maybe you need 10 and 10. And by that, I mean 10 instances and 10 gigs of bandwidth, or I need 6 and 20, meaning I have 6 instances and 20 gigs of bandwidth. All right. So there's a lot of flexibility built into that licensing. And again, once you get to a certain point, you only have to allocate in 10 megabit increments. So maybe I'm in Azure or AWS or GCP or on-prem virtualization infrastructure, and I only need a 20 or 30 meg appliance. I can do that with my pooled infrastructure, or I could not do that with a perpetual or termed appliance.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha. Okay, that clears it up some. So maybe you can help us a little bit, John. Justin and I, we saw something new pop up not too long ago that we were kind of unfamiliar with, and maybe you could help define what it is a little bit better for us. But is there the self-managed option for the licenses kind of popped up about a week ago or so? Are you familiar with how that works?
That is what's called self-managed CADs. Essentially, if you're familiar with our CAD service or ADC as a service option, self-managed is pretty much what it sounds like. You are purchasing the application delivery controller service, but you're managing it on-prem. And essentially what that enables you to do is, last year they were including a percentage of Citrix managed infrastructure tied to that. I think it was like a VPX 25 or something like that in the cloud of choice. But really what it is it's just a different licensing methodology for you to purchase the service, if you will. And I think really where CADS is it's they're melding the two together because CADS itself was ADM service only.
Okay.
Where pooled licensing or VCPU licensing, you could consume ADM service or ADM on-prem.
Okay.
Okay, so CADS really is baked around ADM service, if you will, consuming the service. And really, it's a great methodology because once you deploy the agents, unless the agent breaks, you don't have to manage those agents anymore because once they're registered with the cloud updates those agents. Now that may not be good for everybody because I still have to follow up with PM on whether or not we can set reboot or update schedules for those because that may not work for everybody. But for those organizations who want to basically set it and forget it and not have to touch those and update those appliances, that's going to work out great.
I see. All right. Just kind of thinking about it a little bit where that would be applicable to some of the customer use cases. But that sounds like there was a drive and need for it. So you think that came out of customers hinting towards that as a needed option that they would have? Seems like it kind of did.
What was that, Chris?
Did you see that, or have you seen it kind of come out of requests from the customers as a needed option that they needed in their toolbox? Or was it just like that seemed kind of natural for the way the
I
CAD
think
was
that was a
positioned?
natural progression of
Okay.
the options for our customers. I don't know and wasn't privy to understanding whether or not there was a foreseen need or a request around that. I think it was just the natural progression around our existing offerings that got melded together.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Well, I haven't put my hands on that yet, but it seems very interesting. So I got a little bit of fumbling around and playing with some of that. Let's get some insights on how that actually is constructed and what the ultimate result is from putting self-managed or together there. Neat. And you brought up a pretty funny point too. Out of all the NetScalers over the years that I've seen and worked with through XenTegra, I think I only had one customer that came around to updating a MPX to a SDX, and I remember that the SSDs had to be updated, so the drives themselves would have had to have been extracted from the appliance and replaced, and it wasn't
Correct.
a SKU that was terribly offered or sold. So I definitely could see why it was depreciated and deprecated and kind of taken out of the option list there. But it was always kind of neat that you had that capability if you wanted to. But 99.9% of the time, folks had a pretty clear understanding of what they were getting into with the MPX versus SDX. But yeah, that was something else.
Well, at that point in time, I mean, let's just go back to the 8900s and in the 14, 15Ks. The hardware was identical between the MPX and the SDX.
Yeah.
With the 16K, that is not the case. There is more RAM in the SDX. And again, this is baked in performance for the SDX. They did a lot of testing and tuning, well over 200 hours of testing and tuning of the SDX appliance to get it where the SDX 16K appliance to get it where it is today. Which, as we were talking about consolidation, at one point in time we had 4 or 5 models of appliances. Moving forward, the strategy is the 16K, the SDX 16K, MPX 16K is taking the place of its larger brethren, the 26K appliance, 2650s, I think it is, because of the capacity of this appliance. So what that does is that reduces your spend, gives you more capacity to move forward, but it also simplifies what our customers deploy.
Gotcha. Wow. And I'm looking at some of the hardware. I think you guys have done a great job on the product documentation on the 16,000 and the 9100 series. And one thing that pops out a lot is it's got a new look to it. It's got the new Citrix logo on it still. I think we'll see some of the, if you ordered it today, it's probably sitting in the warehouse with ADC stamped on it on the front of it. But I could probably see that changing over to NetScaler as the logo on the front. And just it's a sleek looking appliance, but what's popping out to me is the optics on this. The SFP 28s are pretty much standard on these now.
Yeah, I think
that's
that's
awesome.
because in the industry, the SFP 28s can do 10 gig and 25 gig. So, that reduces the ask moving forward. If you have a customer, and really the SFP 28s are only a couple $100 difference than the SFP pluses. And as the customers move forward, they have the opportunity to expand their infrastructure without additional cost.
Yeah, for sure.
If they're upgrading their switching infrastructure, they don't have to ask, are we capable of using this additional bandwidth? They know they are.
Yeah, it's excellent. So like the 9100s come with 8 SFP 28s. So we can, that's quite a bit of bandwidth, 200 gigs maximum throughput based on the optic type itself that you can leverage there. And then the 16,000 series, a couple 100 gig interfaces as well. Really up for the uplinks. That's pretty impressive. That's good looking stuff. Well, I think we'll wrap on up. I'm sitting over in Nashville. I got to get over to the airport here to get home for the weekend. But this has been very helpful. I mean, I learned quite a bit, John. So your updates here have been pretty valuable.
I'm glad to help.
Yeah, and we'll follow up again in the next couple of weeks. Get another episode of this out. I think our listeners and customers and team members will benefit greatly from this session. So a lot of useful information. So again, greatly appreciate you joining us today. And thanks, Justin, for getting up early. I know you're up in the Pacific Northwest there, so it's still pretty early for you.
The sun is up, so the day should be started. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
I'm just glad my coffee worked.
I still need one more. I'm in Central Time Zone right now. I need one more cup, get going. Hopped up a little early this morning. Had to play that earlier hour this morning. But over here in Nashville, I had some storms this morning, so I hopped up anyway as the air conditioner in the hotel room was flipping on and off as the power kept recycling. But yeah, again, I appreciate everybody's efforts in joining today. So we'll get this kind of wrapped up and pushed out to the listeners, and we'll check in with you in a couple weeks again and see what else we can chat about. Get some insights and valuable information out to everybody. So I hope you guys all have a great weekend. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Have a great weekend and safe trip home.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon, guys.
Yep. Bye.
Hey, John.
Bye.
John, you there?